here with Dion Lassiter, the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. For those who may be unfamiliar, can you explain what is the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission?
Certainly. Well, first and foremost, thank you for having me here. The Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, we've been around since 1955, so we're in our 70th year. We are the top civil rights enforcement agency in the Commonwealth, protecting the citizens of the Commonwealth from all forms of unharmful discrimination, whether that be in the space of public accommodation, commercial property, education, employment, or fair housing. So we're that entity that makes sure that people understand that if they're facing any form of discrimination, they can file a complaint with the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. We have 3 regional offices, one in Pittsburgh, one here in Harrisburg, and one in Philadelphia. An amazing staff, amazing commissioners with a mission to keep people protected under our Pennsylvania Human Relations Act.
What are some examples of the work you do to protect these people?
So one, we make sure that people know that we exist. So we get out into communities to inform people that they have a right. Two, we have a website that is very user-friendly where people can come and file complaints. The complaints are anonymous. We also share with people what the protected categories are. We share with them what examples of discrimination are. We do a lot of training because we essentially believe in prevention and intervention, but also we're an enforcement agency. The Pennsylvania Human Relations Act is an act that simply says that people cannot be discriminated against, and they have protections, whether that's because of LGBTQ plus status, religious protections, whether that's because of pregnancy status, all protected categories. And so we know that there are the forms of discrimination that occur. And so we're neutral, we're unbiased, and we just simply tell people, if you feel as though that you've been discriminated against, file a complaint with the PHRC, let us investigate it from a form of neutrality and a form of being unbiased so that we can reach a conclusion.
How does your office fit within the state government? Do you take appropriations from the state budget at all?
Yes, we do get appropriations. It's key to note that we actually are under the governor's office, but we are an independent agency. We also have federal contracts. At one particular point in time, those contracts were both with EEOC, where we investigate complaints that come in from the EEOC, as well as HUD. Right now, in the housing space, we primarily are just doing state-only investigations of housing complaints that come in, and we have an EEOC contract.
You've recently released your 2024 No Hate in Our State report. What is this report?
This report is essential to really highlighting some of the challenges that are in our Commonwealth. And the reason why I preface it by saying some of the challenges is because we look at the Commonwealth from a strengths-based perspective. Some years ago, Democratic strategist James Carville, who worked with then President Bill Clinton, he said you have Philadelphia, you have Pittsburgh, and in between you have Kentucky, or something of that nature. We believe at the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, like many people, you have Philadelphia, you have Pittsburgh, and in between you have people who every day are attempting to break down divisions, engage in race dialogue. They have a moral compass. They have a moral imperative. They're working on peace and justice themes. They're Boy Scout leaders. They're Girl Scout leaders. They're Sunday school teachers. They're firemen. They're law enforcement. And so we also recognize that in context, Pennsylvania does have a white nationalist and a white supremacy challenge. That's not an indictment of white individuals, but the data speaks to 78 hate and anti-governmental groups. PA, most recently, based on the data from the Southern Poverty Law Center, is ranked 4th in the nation. Only California, Florida, and Texas have more hate groups that assemble. Of those hate groups, we recognize that there's a lot of underreporting, but there also are, aspects of communities that are letting PHRC know. We had a sighting of neo-Nazis. We've had a march here. We've had Ku Klux Klan that have left leaflets. And so the No Hate in Our State report is our 4th report that just really highlights the qualitative and quantitative data and the best practice solutions to address anti-Semitism, to address AAPI hate, to address Islamophobia, to address, discrimination towards individuals who are LGBTQ plus, anti-Black racism, but also the impact that white nationalism also has on white individuals in our rural, in our urban, and our suburban areas. So it's a monumental report that just really highlights some of the challenges, but also some of the successes. And what I mean by successes is how we engage with communities that also have, some challenges with microaggression, forms of hate, and forms of discrimination.
How did you collect the data that is found in this report?
Great question. What we have is we have some reporting structures that come in through the PA Heritage Society, also the complaints that we have. What's really amazing about the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission is that we work in tandem. There's a social justice milieu where we work with advisory councils. We have 16 advisory councils. Those councils are spread throughout the Commonwealth. They know of those different actors that are in their communities. We also have something called SJAs, Social Justice Ambassadors. We just launched a civil rights division, first civil rights division of its kind for human relations commissions. It's modeled after the United States Department of Justice Office of Civil Rights, CRS, Community Relations Services, that comes of age during the unfortunate assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Community relations is implemented. They are peace builders. So our civil rights division is modeled after that under the PHRA. And so we're in communities and communities are reporting to us. We do no hate in our state town halls, not because we want to, the community asks us to get there. And so we collect the data based on the trends, based on reporting, and based on what we know is occurring because we're being fed information from law enforcement. We're being fed information that's being provided to us by our social justice ambassadors, our advisory councils, and then also the number of complaints that we have that come in through the PHRC. We always have an annual report that's due to all of the members of the State Assembly by March 31st. And that annual report will talk about forms of employment discrimination, housing discrimination, forms of retaliation, and things of that nature. I encourage everyone to go to our website. Here's a report here for your viewing audience. It's an amazing report that just is replete with a lot of the things that we're doing, whether we're talking about white nationalism trends, hate crimes in the United States, hate crimes in Pennsylvania, examples of hate crimes, if I may, harassment. It could be both in person or electronic, physical assault. Destruction of property is a hate crime. Also, criminal trespassing, arson or firebombing, terroristic threats. It's important for your viewing audience to know that when they experience a hate crime, whether it's real, perceived, or imagined, to call 911, to call their local authorities, but also to work with communities. One of the beautiful things about communities is the strength of communities to come forward to speak up and to also stand up.
How often do you release a report like this?
Every 2 years. And so this is our fourth one within the past, 6 years.
So this is from a 2-year time length of data?
Yes.
And what do you seek to learn in this report?
Well, I think the report informs people from not an either or perspective, but a both and perspective. Here's the data, but here is what's being done. So when people go through the report, they'll see a functional definition of what anti-Semitism is, what Islamophobia is, what PHRC is doing in that space with our virtual lunch and learns and thing of that nature. Also a glossary of terms. Oftentimes people, they confuse racism with prejudice, with bigotry, with discrimination, with effective prejudice. And so the glossary of terms helps people. There's also a lot of recommendations. So what we seek to do is for people to look at the report, to see some of the challenges, and to build community. The most important thing that we can do in the Commonwealth is build community, not to get seduced by the concept of the black-white binary, because PA is not just made up of black and white people. It's made up of what I like to say a metaphoric kaleidoscope, that there's beauty in all of us. There's beauty when you grow up in a rural area. There's beauty when you grow up in a suburban area. There's beauty when you grow up in an urban area. Some of us love the Eagles. They just won the Super Bowl. I'm not a Philadelphia Eagles fan, but I grew up in Philadelphia. I like the Pittsburgh Steelers. Never been to Pittsburgh until I started working for the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission. Some people are into farming. Some people are into hunting. One of the things that we seek to do at the PHRC, beyond our reports and all of the things we do, is to foster something we call the beloved community. The beloved community is the social justice framework of Rabbi Abraham Yeshua Heschel and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., where we see the inherent worth of the dignity of the person that's in front of us. So in PA, if you're LGBTQ+, we see you because you're human. If you're African American, we see you because you're human. If you're white, we see you because you're human. We want people to recognize that there shouldn't be levels of inferiority, and there certainly shouldn't be levels of superiority.
What findings in this report stood out to you?
The fact that we still continue the trend. So when we're looking at, once again, Pennsylvania, 48% of white power demonstrators and protests targeted LGBTQ+ people. That stood out. 20% white power demonstration protests were anti-Semitic, that we still have growing anti-Semitism in PA, that we still have discrimination along the continuum of LGBTQ plus individuals. The other thing that stood out is that hate crimes in the United States are still trending in the direction that they have been for a considerable period of time, that we need to do more than tone down the rhetoric. We need to actually actively work to train individuals on being anti-racist. The other thing that was noted in the report was, we saw a lot of data of discrimination along the indices of AAPI hate because of COVID. We're still seeing, not the same numbers, but we're still seeing discrimination towards the Asian American Pacific Islander community. I think it's important for people to understand, once again, if they pick up the report, they will see that there are LGBTQ plus protections under the law. They will understand the levels of bullying that is still taking place in our schools, that 1 out of every 5 high school students reports being bullied at school. That's alarming. I think they also will understand that there are education protections. And then from a historical standpoint, the report points out the 70th year anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education, what that means. The report highlights Enough. The Enough report is a initiative spearheaded by Senator Art Haywood that he and I, along with my chief of staff, Zulay Rojas, we traveled 3,000 miles to 15 PASHE schools that make up the Commonwealth educational system to look at microaggressions as well as racism on college campuses. As reported by the students, Enough is the acronym for E, End Racial Harassment in Speech, N, Nurture and Retain Students of Color, O, Organize an Incident Report System, U, Unveil Mandatory Diversity Training, G, Generate Mental Health Resources, and H, Hire Faculty and Staff of Color. A lot of people have pushed back with regards to the report. It's not our narrative. It's the students who were speaking to the microaggressions. One particular university, under the leadership of its president, Bloomsburg University, Dr. Bashir Hanna, embraced such a report, opened up his school, opened up his students who shared their narratives. What we also recognized on those college campuses was not that just Black students and students of color were faced with microaggressions. Some of our white students at Mansfield University who come from a rural area were faced with some challenges as well. And so once again, we want communities that are free from unlawful discrimination. And I think what this report did was it was very nuanced, it was very balanced, it was very revealing, but also the report just didn't talk about hate statistics. The report talked about actual responses, what communities are doing in the Commonwealth to say, we're speaking back to hate, no hate here in our state. And they look like, once again, that kaleidoscope. There's a level of white individuals in the Commonwealth, Asian American Pacific Islander, Latino, and others who are standing up to forms of hate. And so for me, very revealing report, but I don't want anyone to think that PA is in a space where we don't have people who are good, decent, honest people who make up the 67 counties who are practicing peace and justice based on the lens that they see how to move forward and how to treat people with dignity and with respect.
You did touch on Pennsylvania is now one of the fourth largest number of hate and anti-government groups. And the report says that in 2023, there was an increase in white nationalism trends in Pennsylvania. What do you think caused that increase?
Well, I think that, one, I look at it from a macro level. What we have right now is we have a lot of theories out there. We have the white replacement theory. We have the theory and the data that speaks to demographic shifts. So anyone who discipline is in anthropology or sociology, they know that Pennsylvania is changing, that places like Hazleton and places like Allentown, Reading, Lancaster are increasingly becoming brown. We have to talk about the racial elephants that are in the room. And what that looks like oftentimes is white rural rage. There are authors who write about this against the backdrop of white anger, against if you juxtapose that with white violence, as well as forms of white victimization. Once again, not an indictment against white humanity, but all these things converge. And there are people who believe that a particular Democratic Party has left them behind. When we embarked upon the 67 county tour, it's called the Beloved Community Tour. I've been to about 42 counties. not everything is rooted in racism. Some of it is rooted in classism. Some counties are articulating to me that when we ask them, and this is very participatory, what do you see as it relates to challenges in your community? It's not government saying this is what the challenges are. What are the challenges that you see in your community as it relates to education, as it relates to employment, as it relates to housing, public accommodations, or commercial property? People are talking to us about infrastructure. Individuals are articulating to us. A black man in Beaver County said, I'm African American. 5 of my friends are white. They're not white supremacists. They're not white nationalists. And they're voting for President Donald Trump because they believe that they've been left behind by whatever the other party is. And so once again, the beauty of diversity is that you can be a Trump supporter. You can be a Biden supporter. You can be a Republican. You can be a Democrat. You can be a libertarian. You can also be an independent. You can be an atheist. You can be an agnostic. You can be a Scientologist. Whatever you are, let's have levels of what Ben Franklin called levels of civility. And that's what the Beloved Community Tour says. The Beloved Community Tour, when we go to counties, it's me learning. I come from an urban area. I get out to PA, Central PA. I get out to Western PA, Westmoreland County, other counties. I'm looking at greenery. I'm looking at scenery. I'm saying to myself, wow, if I lived out here, meditation would be on another level than where I grew up at, right? And so once again, not getting divided by some of the challenges that we see. So I think that there's a growing resentment. I think there's a lot of seducing on both sides. And so I think that some of the challenges that we see that contribute to this is, one, we're not diverse. We don't live in certain communities where there's a person that looks different than we look. And so if we have more race dialogue, and that's what we're trying to do at the PHRC, the Razor Sharp Barbershop Initiative is me as a African American going to rural PA and going to all white barbershops to have a conversation that, yes, some of us love Mario Lemieux and some of us love Wayne Gretzky. Some of us love baseball and some of us love equestrian. Some of us love hunting. Some of us love fly fishing. But the reality in these barbershops is that one of the common threads is we all know the importance of having examinations to make sure that we prevent prostate cancer, that we're fathers, that we're uncles, that we're brothers, that we're significant others. And so 2 of the barbershops I've gone to, I've learned that some of us aren't even Eagles or Pittsburgh Steelers fans. We're Cleveland Browns fans, all the way back in the day with Bernie Kosar. So what we try to do is bridge the divide, but a more further conversation around why there is growing white nationalism and white supremacy. I would just encourage the viewing audience to do a Google search. There are books out there. But once again, there's white individuals and others that are pushing back against white nationalism, white supremacy. And then I think that terminology matters, right? So over the past 3 years, I don't talk as much and I don't do presentations as much on white nationalism, white supremacy. It's a function of human brokenness. We all have a form of human brokenness, but I would be remiss if I didn't say we have to address Islamophobia. We have to address anti-Semitism. What happened at the Tree of Life, we have to stay guarded that those things don't happen. We stand firm against the desecration of any house of faith. We stand firm that we don't discriminate against people because of LGBTQ plus status, because they're disabled, because they're white and they live in a rural area. No one should be discriminated against in any space as it relates to employment, housing, or because you need to go pray at a certain time, or because you're pregnant. And so once again, PHRC is that entity, but it's both and. We work with communities, NAACP, Anti-Defamation League, white churches, black churches, Asian American Pacific community centers, Latino community centers, colleges, all with pushing the Commonwealth forward so that we can compete in a global market economy. You have members of State Assembly who are Republican, who are friends of the PHRC, who support the PHRC. And once again, not everything is centered around race. Some things are classism, some things are misunderstanding, but we are an enforcement agency. And so if you file a complaint with the PHRC, we have mediation, we have trainings, but we have to enforce the law, which is the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act.
What legal protections does Pennsylvania currently have in place for people of minority groups who may be at risk for discrimination?
Once again, our Pennsylvania Human Relations Act.
The federal government is forcing organizations to end their DEI efforts. What could be the long-term effect on this?
Well, that's a great question. And I think it deserves more time. I'll say briefly that whether it's being called diversity, equity, inclusion, or JEDI, justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, or DBI, diversity, equity, belonging, or inclusion, it's really about belonging and humanity. When I see you and when you see me, We don't live in a colorblind society. I love to live in a colorful society. Some days I feel like I'm Yul Brynner. Other days I feel like I'm Sean Connery. Other days I feel like I want to be Morris Chestnut. And everybody should be comfortable if I want to say I look like Boy George or I feel like Boy George. I think it's important, though, for whatever the framing to be, is that your viewing audience knows that they have protections under the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act. We also have to be very clear here that the attacks on DEI is the stripping away of misinformation. Ira Katz Nelson has a book entitled When Affirmative Action Was White. We never talk about legacy emissions, right? We never talk about those individuals who their parents went to an Ivy League university like a Brown, like a Dartmouth or Cornell. I went to University of Penn. But no one talked to me about legacy emissions, and I've had family members who went to the University of Penn. And so DEI, once again, we have to be very careful against the backdrop of Project 2025, where what we really want to do is, what the larger we wants to do is usher in the concept of race and gender hierarchy for white males that has already existed. That's not just me. That's the work of the racial contract and Charles Mills. That's the work of George Frederickson, A Short History of Racism. That's the work of Paul Kivel, Uprooting Racism. That's the work of David Wellman's Portraits of White Racism. And so the attacks on DEI of saying that individuals got this position because they were not qualified or they were mediocre, it's just not founded. The data speaks to the individuals that benefited historically and in the contemporary moment the most from DEI were white women and others. You used to be clerical, meaning the larger you, and then you became a president or you became a director of the YWCA or the YMCA. And so once again, I don't want to live in a world that's void of looking at diversity. I'm a professor at Westchester University. I want books that's going to talk about Sitting Bull and the Native American indigenous experience. But I also want to see books that talk about the Jewish experience and that talks about the white experience. When Janet Helms talks about white identity development, she talks about how most whites have a strong ethnic kind of orientation, but it's okay to have a strong racial identity, but it can't be rooted in superiority. And so once again, the diversity for me helps me grow. Diversity taught me more about male privilege and how to make sure that I'm not operating with toxic masculinity, and not all masculinity is toxic. My masculinity is caring. Diversity also taught me that, hey, Chad, time out. You're African American. Your people have been through something, but you have to divorce yourself from ethnocentrism because you're not the only person that has suffered something. And so diversity has taught me more about the experiment of America and the beauty of America and how many people bring their identities to this thing called the American experiment, and we're better for it. This role of PHRC has really encouraged me to understand the diversity and the beauty of diversity. At the PHRC, we work with people who make up all 67 counties in one way or another. They've touched one of those counties. They're disabled, they're atheists, they're believers of God, they're Buddhists. That's a form of diversity. So these attacks that we see that are happening nationally, we're stripping things away. It's part of a larger narrative. It's the narrative around critical race theory that was propagated, and people were saying, I don't want my child having critical race theory in middle school, high school, and college. And to those parents, if I was on the other end of that, I would have said, Mom, Dad, guardian, you're absolutely right. It's not being taught in middle school, high school, college. It's being taught in law school if it's being taught there. The whole concept around let's ban books. Why are we banning books? Because history tells us something. I want to read about the experiences. Nevertheless, I do agree with aspects of let's not beat up on individuals. We shouldn't be in a space where our materials, our narratives, our presentations, and our lectures leave our white brothers and sisters and others feeling a form of white guilt and have the other side feeling like, yeah, look what they did. You as a white individual, if that's how you identify, you did not do anything that was in the history books. Me as a black individual, I didn't do anything that's in the history books. But we have to be mindful that history sometimes repeats itself.
Lastly, how can the state legislature work to make sure the number of hate crimes and discrimination in Pennsylvania goes down?
I would say that to partner with more individuals, and I would also say that I'd be remiss if I didn't mention in the 7 years I've been here, you have people like State Rep Frankel, you have Senator Jay Costa, you have several others whose names may escape me at this particular point in time, who are committed to making Pennsylvania a safe state. I think the other thing that all of us can do, both the R's and the D's in our state legislature, is to really have more race dialogue, more conversations, more listening. I don't think that we should be seduced if a person walks in the room and a person says that they're a Republican, nor should we frown upon anybody because they walk in the room and they're a Democrat. I'm not saying that race dialogue changes things. I think we need to strengthen hate and ethnic intimidation laws on the book, and we should hold people accountable, and we should prosecute them if the result is that they've engaged in a form of hate crime or ethnic racial intimidation. So I'm very clear on that. I'm very clear that even though we talk about the beloved community framework and we want to create peace and justice in PA, there is an entity, and that's called the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, that if you file a complaint, we are an enforcement agency. We have to enforce the law. And so my hope for Pennsylvania is rooted in a quote by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "We must accept finite disappointment, but never lose infinite hope." I'm encouraged by all of the individuals and leadership here in Pennsylvania, starting with our governor and several others who are committed to fighting for justice for all individuals. Whatever happens on the federal level, we at the PHRC will continue to respect the ideology of individuals, but also we want people to respect our ideals and concepts of how we protect the rights of citizens, and we do it by the law. There's nothing nefarious about the Pennsylvania Human Relations Act. It's for any individual who is faced with a form of unlawful discrimination, they come to the PHRC. Thank you for having me. Once again, check our website out. This that I'm holding in my hand is a very emotional report. It's filled with a lot of possibilities. It's filled with a lot of promise. But the purpose of this report was not to divide our Commonwealth, but to highlight what's going on in our Commonwealth. And we believe that we're going to be a better Commonwealth because all of us would have had an interaction with one another to reach out across those kind of, barriers, however barriers are articulated, and those divisions, however divisions are created, to simply say, let's have more conversations. Let's create more policies that protect not a particular race of people, but all protected categories in the Commonwealth.
Chad Dion Lassiter, Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Human Relations Commission, thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.